I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
And good luck.
Good evening. A government bailout for the Tata Steel plant at Port Talbot. But is this really the answer for the British steel industry? I got a chance today at PMQs to ask about prisoner releases. I'm worried we're letting the wrong people out and maybe putting the wrong people in. And, of course, in the middle of the night, our time, it was the Trump v Harris debate. It seems the Harris camp are very happy indeed. We'll debate and discuss all of those things and much more. But first, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 7 o'clock. Your headlines. The Foreign Secretary has announced over £600 million worth of support for Ukraine, while the US Secretary of State has announced £700 billion. It comes as David Lammy and Antony Blinken are currently in Kyiv on a joint trip, calling it a critical moment in the war with Russia. Their joint visit follows reports that Joe Biden will lift a ban on British Storm Shadow missiles being used on Russian territory after Iran supplied ballistic missiles to Russia. Speaking after meeting with the Ukrainian president, Mr. Lammy announced the support package.
And today I can confirm more than 600 million worth of support for Ukraine, including 242 million this financial year for immediate humanitarian, energy and stabilisation needs, as well as support for reform, recovery and reconstruction.
Meanwhile, back in the UK, Labour is facing mounting pressure from within its own ranks to reverse cuts to the winter fuel payment. In today's exchanges at Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak pushed the Keir Starmer for details on the impact of the cuts, which will see 10 million pensioners lose the payment. Despite the opposition, the Prime Minister insists it's necessary to fix a £22 billion financial shortfall. The Business Secretary has unveiled a multi-million-pound package to support Tata Steel's shift to greener production. Jonathan Reynolds blamed the previous government for failing to make critical decisions. However, the Conservatives are accusing Labour of extending a deal they once criticised. Jonathan Reynolds says the new agreement includes investment opportunities to secure long-term jobs, despite up to 2,800 positions being at risk. And in the US, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have met again at a 9/11 memorial event in New York after facing off in their first and possibly only presidential debate last night. The showdown began with a handshake but quickly took a turn when Harris mocked Trump's rallies, accusing him of boring his crowds. Trump hit back, defending his popularity and attacking Harris on her immigration stance and economic policies.
She's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
Those are your latest headlines. Now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. The British steel industry has been in decline for decades. Now, some of it, of course, is because China have been producing vast amounts of steel, flooding the market, much of it, of course, actually being produced and sold at a loss, but taking market share. But the other element here, and it's quite important, is that in order to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions and to meet net zero targets, we've almost been gleeful that we've closed steel plants. And I remember very well when Redcar closed just under a decade ago, the government seemed delighted. And yet that steel production moved to India, with the products being imported back here. So I've always had a bit of a bee in my bonnet about the decline of steel. But with Port Talbot, the last really big steel plant, and Scunthorpe a bit too, but Port Talbot, the last big primary steel producer in this country, that is going to close with a loss of 2,800 jobs. But the government today have stepped in. Jonathan Reynolds did step in today and say this in the House of Commons earlier on today.
Where the previous government had simply ceased to make decisions and decided to leave them for us to deal with. This was a dereliction of duty, and it has left the steel industry in particular in an extremely perilous position. The last government had been promising a plan for the steel industry for years. With what I'm able to announce today, with the signing of a legally binding deal that enables Tata to order their electric arc furnace as part of a significantly improved package, this government has made more progress in 2 months than they made over the last Parliament.
Well, Jonathan Reynolds may have a point about the last government not really getting to grips with this. I rather agreed with that. But bear in mind, what we're talking about here is an electric arc furnace. It's considered to be much greener. It is, in terms of emissions, greener. And basically what we do here is we recycle second-hand steel. Now, that's not to say that second-hand steel doesn't have its uses, but I'm worried, particularly at a time when the world feels less safe than it has at any point in my lifetime, that steel isn't just an industry that produces jobs and income. There's actually, I think, a strategic side to steel as well. Now, joining me down the line, expert witness Roy Fishwick is Managing Director of Cleveland Steel and Tubes Limited. And Roy, I understand that you're the largest stockist of repurposed steel in the United Kingdom, and I'm guessing that today's announcement for you is good news.
Definitely, not least of which with the political change and with the fact that basically the decisions to close the blast furnaces have already been made, and in fact that sequence of events have been set in chain. I was concerned, genuinely concerned, that we'd end up with nothing. So it's certainly the case that this investment going in has ensured that we've got some steel production here where I think there was a real risk there'd be none.
But it's still pretty puny, isn't it? I mean, we're still going to be a very big importer of both primary and secondary steel.
Yes, no, there's no two ways around that. But then that's a trend, as you've already pointed out, that we've been established for a very long time. We have some good processing facility here, but in terms of primary manufacture, it's a very small amount relative to the global market, and it's quite a small amount relative to the UK requirements, particularly in certain products.
Yeah, but I mean, Roy, you know, good for you, and you know, I understand that your business is repurposed steel, but surely a nation state, when it's thinking about national security, surely it needs to be a producer of primary steel as well.
I would tend to agree. I think we need primary steel production. There are issues around that because we don't actually have the raw materials that are required. So although you'd have the primary production here, you'd still be potentially susceptible to not being able to get the raw materials that you require from elsewhere. But then equally, you would have facility, I guess, to stockhold or to store certain amounts of material. But it's not even just, I mean, the security aspect I understand and agree with, but economically, etc., we have absolutely no influence on essentially the cost of steel within the UK now, virtually.
What, because the price is determined at a global level?
It's a global, I mean, it's getting worse with steel as well. So it's a global commodity, which means it's handled by global businesses, as you would expect. Make decisions that affect, and you made the point about production moving away from here to elsewhere, then we've got no control over the cost or the carbon. You just get the product back in according to what's available. But the other thing you're seeing globally, particularly as you mentioned China as well, are tariffs and quotas. So the US now is tariffing nearly 50% of the cost on Chinese steel. And it's not a, excuse the pun, but it's not a global system. So if you've got countries that are putting very large tariff on, that means there's even more material to dump elsewhere. So the market's incredibly skewed. And if you're only reliant on the foreign supply, then you're fully subject to that vagary of the market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Roy, final thought. You know, this is a package that means the electric arc furnace will be going in South Wales. For how many years will that even be there, in your view?
I think there are better options in some regards with the electric arc, because you can potentially change the product that it's producing perhaps a bit more simply, and actually, because it doesn't meet the full demand of the UK, it should be able to produce material that can be consumed here, and that should be okay. It'd be nice to see them built. That's the one thing I would say. We're still not to that point. So yes, we've got now a forward trajectory, but we do still need to see it happen.
Roy Fishwick, thank you for joining me. Well, Roy pointing out there is something of a lifeline for the British steel industry, but it's not much of one. I'm joined on my panel today by Lord Monckton, hereditary peer and former Conservative Party political advisor, even to Margaret Thatcher, and regular on the show, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, former Member of Parliament for Brighton and Hove. Christopher Monckton, I find it extraordinary that we are not, as a nation, going to produce primary steel, which is much needed in many military products, and that's why I'm using this argument.
Just take the Second World War. During the Battle of Britain, we were turning out 100 Spitfires a week, and they were partly aluminium and partly steel. We couldn't do that now because we don't even make enough steel to do that. So we can't now make and sustain military material for a war. It can't be done. Why can't it be done? When I was 50 years ago a cub reporter on the Yorkshire Post, one of the first electric arc furnaces in Britain was installed in Sheffield, and I was taken to have a look at it and wrote up a piece about it for the paper. In those days, electricity was affordable. But then along came the watermelons, the Greens who are red on the inside, who say, oh, global warming, global warming, global warming, as though this were a problem. You just go outside tonight and you'll see it isn't really. And therefore, it became impossible to use coking coal, which is far and away the most efficient way of making steel even today, because people said, oh, emissions, emissions, emissions. And then said, let's have electric arc furnaces. Trouble is, the price of electricity in this country is 7 times that in China and Russia, India and Pakistan, the 4 major producers who are gobbling up the whole market, not only in steel, but also in the techno-metals, the complicated things like lithium, which are much rarer. I mean, if you wanted to have global net zero, for instance, supposing you actually meant it, and the whole world, rather than just the West, committed economic harakiri to get there, then the trouble is you'd need 10,000 years' worth of the total global current annual supply of lithium. It's just not there. And then if you go to vanadium steel, 67,000 years worth, according to the Finnish Geological Survey, which has done a detailed survey on this.
Without having an argument over global warming, it is true, Christopher's point is true, that it's almost as if we rejoice at closing steelworks. I quoted Redcar earlier, because that, we show that as a Western country, we've reduced our CO2 emissions since 1990 by almost 50%, but we've been deindustrialising to do it.
Well, this is bizarrely probably where you would agree with the Green Party MPs that are in Parliament. They have constantly called for the fact that our national account for carbon should include the imports, because at the moment the current system,
it's a con, isn't it?
It basically means we don't shut down carbon, we shut down jobs, and we export the jobs all around the world, and we end up with our people jobless without a proper national income. And so actually there are some areas where we don't have to pit this as environmentalists versus a lot of the environmentalists have been calling for that in the first place. So first of all, we need to sort out that carbon accounting because it produces adverse effects.
Well, actually, arguably, if the steel is produced in India under lower environmental safeguards and then shipped back to the United Kingdom, we're actually putting CO2 up.
You've got the higher cost of production emissions and the higher cost in transport.
Sometimes you can import things that are better. New Zealand lamb produces less carbon than British lamb, even if you take into account the transportation costs.
But back to steel, Lloyd. Back to steel.
The other problem with the steel discussion, and you touched on it previously, Your Lordship, is around the price of energy. And we haven't sorted out our energy issues. France is investing a huge amount in new nuclear, taking a long time for them to get it on board, and also hydrogen, with hydrogen furnaces going alongside. They have put billions of pounds into their works around that. We have put rather meagre £500 million in for an electric arc furnace. There's no real prospect of hydrogen in our country. It's still years and years away, and there's no real prospect of a development of nuclear power. And the failure of nuclear has also led to the closure of aluminium smelters across the country as well.
Successive governments. We can't just blame the last 14 years.
No, you're quite right.
We really can't. We haven't looked ahead at any of this.
Although the Lib Dems did shut down the nuclear programme.
And we haven't asked the candy cane question.
Go on.
The candy cane question. Tom Sawyer goes into a sweetie shop, slaps a few sticky coins on the counter and says, gee, how many candy canes can I get for this, miss? And that's the fundamental question of economics. So if you want to shut down the steelworks in the name of saving the planet, then what you have to do is to work out, supposing Britain actually went from here in a straight line to net zero by 2050, which is the official target date. By how much would global temperature fall thanks to our destroying our own economy, as we have already destroyed the steel industry? And that's the main reason why it was destroyed.
We are a very minor emitter.
The answer is you would reduce global temperature by 1/1000th of a Celsius degree at a cost just to net zeroise the grid alone, according to the grid authority, of £3 trillion sterling.
You might, but equally there are other environmental factors that might make temperatures go up or down. Final thought on this, Lloyd. You've got a Labour government in power, a Labour government that would have had mass votes of people working in manufacturing industries. That link's not there anymore, is it, despite the TUC conference?
Well, I think this example of rolling this out as one of the first, in the first 3 months, this is one of the key issues that they have dealt with, to salvage the best that they can. And I think your expert put it quite right, that the decision to close the blast furnace had already been made. It couldn't have been reversed at this late stage.
That was a fair point.
So what Labour have done is tried to salvage, quite literally, the steel that they can.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Put it into the furnace.
What is interesting is that at the TUC conference this week, there's been a vote, and the TUC have said, by a narrow vote, but they've said we need to prevent oil and gas workers becoming the miners of this generation. So I think there's some very interesting games that are going on here politically. Right, enough of that. In a moment, we'll talk about today's Prime Minister's questions. I raised the issue of prisoner releases. Is there a danger that we let people out of prison who are career criminals, who are bound to reoffend, and fill our prisons up with people who've said pretty beastly things on Facebook, but said things and not done things? All of that in just a moment.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Luke Douglas Hugh is a plogger. It's the act of jogging and picking up litter at the same time.
Ah, I thought it had something to do with cycling, but I was thinking of recycling. You better explain what the term is.
Plogging originates really as an expression from Sweden, from someone called Erik Alström, who combined the two words of plocka in Swedish and jogging, so plogging.
And what does plog uppa mean?
Picking up.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I see.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Do you take a bag with you or something and you pick up rubbish? There you go.
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of being a jogger, how do you combine the two? Because joggers wouldn't
you have
want
to keep up the pace,
Yeah, they wouldn't
don't
want to
you?
keep stopping to pick stuff up, would they?
I'm the coastline runner. I run
Yes.
the coast collecting plastic pollution.
Which
mainly.
coast?
Well, I've done the whole of the East Coast, from Lowestoft to Leith.
Wow.
And then cut across from Edinburgh to Glasgow on the Grand Union Canal.
Yeah.
A few years ago, someone said, Luke, don't get all grand and stuff. You're not the coastline runner. you're just a plogger. And I thought, hang on a minute, what's that? And I looked into it, and I realised that that's what I was doing.
Do you do it entirely on your own, or do you do it in groups?
I do it. I originally started on my own. I got clapped off by a mayor in Great Yarmouth, but now more and more people join me, and I.
What I find interesting is that, I mean, jogging, you could say, is just something you do for yourself, for your body, but what you're doing is something extra. I mean, you're making a difference. Do you think you make much of a difference?
No, to be honest.
Oh.
I don't. I think I'm making a difference in raising awareness of not polluting our beaches so much.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, there we are. I got called with the Speaker today to ask a question in PMQs. Let's have a quick look at what I said and what the response of the Prime Minister, or should I say non-response of the Prime Minister, was.
Some extraordinary celebratory scenes outside Britain's prisons where, in some cases, serious career criminals were released. And this to make way for, yes, rioters, but equally those who've said unpleasant things on Facebook and elsewhere on social media. Does the Prime Minister understand? There is a growing feeling of anger in this country that we are living through two-tier policing and a two-tier justice system.
I'm angry to be put in a position of having to release people who should be in prison because the last government broke the prison system. And the Prime Minister was repeatedly warned. He had his own release scheme. He was repeatedly warned that he had to adopt the scheme that we put in place. The former Justice Minister said if we don't do it, we'll have to get down on our knees and pray. The police chiefs made it absolutely clear in a letter to him before the election that he needed to take action, saying that they wouldn't be able to discharge their duties and saying the risk was loss of an ability to detain suspects. That means, Mr. Speaker, an inability to arrest people committing offences. That's how bad it was, and they warned the Leader of the Opposition that further delays until after the general election will increase the risk significantly. What did he do? He delayed and increased the risks.
Well, the Prime Minister was not going to answer my direct question in any way at all, and all those Labour MPs screaming and shouting at me, gosh, it felt like being back in the European Parliament. I really rather enjoyed it. But the serious point, of course, and he's right, that with a population that has exploded over the course of the last few years, the previous government did not build enough prison places. But the whole question of early release, I mean, what is the point of a sentence if people are let out after only serving 40% of it? One of the people released from one of the northern prisons yesterday had, wait for it, 109 previous convictions. So that person, I would say, is bound to reoffend. Well, I'm joined down the line by Gaynor Bell, and your son Stephen Bell was murdered at the age of 22, and you're a knife crime campaigner, Gaynor. And, you know, the guy that did this was actually released early, wasn't he?
Yes, yes. But not only that, you know, I foresaw that he'd reoffend again, which he has done. He's reoffended for a violent crime. This guy, to me, is somebody that terrifies me to be on the streets, because before the age of 20, he'd committed something like 19 crimes. That was before he killed my son. He's reoffended. He was locked up again. He's been locked up for 2 years. I didn't find out until the parole hearing, which I was invited to attend, which he would not face me again. That's another subject, but not facing, the victims. And I found out the Home Secretary had to make a decision whether the parole board were right in their decision of letting him out again. And the parole board decided he was going to come out, and he should have been let out probably on the 26th of August. I'm presuming now, because I haven't been told, that he's still locked up. But going back to letting prisoners out early, the probation are struggling now. How are they going to do the risk evaluations on them? They're just not going to be able to handle it. There's going to be more and more violence. And can I just say, when we had the COVID on, how quickly did they get something together, building-wise or whatever? Okay, they weren't secure, but I'm sure they could, make secure units very quickly. They knew this was happening. The government knew this was happening, and we should have made provisions years ago for it.
I think, Gaynor, you make that point very powerfully, very emotionally, and very well, and I thank you for joining me on the programme. Well, Gaynor made some very strong points there, didn't she? What a good point she made. That when it came to COVID, suddenly there were Nightingale hospitals springing up. The government thought it was a priority. And Starmer is right to criticise the last 14 years. But something looks very wrong about what happened yesterday.
I think
celebrations outside prisons, champagne corks, spliffs being lit. It looks awful, Lloyd.
It does look awful. And it looks awful, I think, on two fronts. One is because people then don't trust the sentence that someone gets. And two, they see people who seem to be celebrating someone else's misfortune. And so that is the problem. Now, but that doesn't solve, that is a problem, but it doesn't solve the issue that we have, which is prisons overcrowded. Clearly, you need to build more prisons. But clearly you also need to be more didactic in the kind of sentences that you are offering people. At the moment, we seem to, for violent crimes, as we've just heard there, it seems to be people are let out. And for financial crimes or for, you talked about Facebook crimes, like this, those things seem to constantly, we're passing laws to make them aggravated offences. What does aggravated offence really mean if you're going to cut the sentence in half anyway? Let's actually get to the basis where we can properly give people serious punishments when they're violent. But for those who aren't violent, I think there's an element also of community payback, which includes embarrassment. And I know that sounds a bit draconian, but I think if you are and not just community embarrassment, not just community embarrassment that's in the next door town, in the town that you live, in the town that your family live in, where if you do something wrong, yes, you should be painting the ironing railings for
Lloyd,
and you should, because embarrassment often stops people doing things more than punishment.
No, you see, we do agree on some things. Christopher, should people be going to prison because they've said beastly things on social media?
No. Either you mean it about free speech or you don't. And I think that one of the, if you'll forgive me, Lloyd, one of the problems with the left is that because they're wrong about everything, they want to censor free speech. Otherwise, they wouldn't want to censor it because they'd be happy to debate it.
These laws have come in under the Conservative Party.
Oh, they're just as bad.
I mean, I'm talking about the left, which includes the Conservative Party.
Well, yeah. For you, yes.
The problem, I mean, if I were to go and say a quiet prayer within 200 yards of the baby butchering clinic in Bristol.
Well, that's a matter of opinion. That's a matter of opinion, Christopher.
Let's get back to the main issue here, which is that
abortion is a legal issue. Just to be clear.
When I was at 10 Downing Street, there were approximately 40,000 prisoners on the estate throughout Britain. Now it's 100,000 coming up, and the growth is very interesting. It's because governments go on churning out laws to make more and more things illegal. And because a lot of these things are not crimes of violence where you lock them up because otherwise they are a risk to the public. And that was the story of this poor lady who's lost her son so tragically. And God bless her for standing up and trying to bring the politicians to some sort of sense about this. But
no, she was very logical in everything she said.
Absolutely, entirely right. And so what's now got to happen is that it really is an emergency. Literally every day the Home Office gets figures on how many more people can we shoehorn into this grossly overloaded prison system. And it's partly, again, it comes back to mass immigration. It's partly that those who are described by the prison service as BAME are more prone to offending. And so that means you get more of them.
They're more prone to being locked up.
I've just looked at all the figures.
That is a slightly separate debate, but I tell you what is interesting is there are 10,000 foreign people in British prisons.
Yeah.
And I said yesterday
Estonia has offered to
I
take
know.
them for a fee.
Funny enough, I looked at that, and it would be cheaper to put British prisoners in Estonia than keep them here.
And they wouldn't like Estonian prisoners.
No, they wouldn't like them at all.
You wouldn't need to do it for British prisoners, but what you could do is to say for foreign prisoners that we can't return back to their country because the country is too dangerous, we do have a third country for you to go. That wouldn't be totally out of order. But I do think we also need to think about what we do, which is that bit between prison and innocence. I do think that it's quite right that if you go and harass women going in to terminate a pregnancy, if you harass them, there should be some punishment for you because it's wrong to do. I think it's sickening. It's one of the most sickening things that you can do if you're harassing women going in for healthcare.
That's not really healthcare, though, is it?
It is healthcare.
We're not debating
a baby.
Gentlemen,
it's not a baby until it's born.
Debating abortion. We could debate whether 24 weeks should come to 22, which is my view. We'll do it another evening.
But there needs to be some sort of punishment for these people who break rules that society says aren't allowed. But what we can't just do is automatically assume the only stick that we have in our armoury is prison. Because otherwise we get to a situation where actually in Britain we have a higher prison population, but we also have more reoffending than we do in most European countries.
Here's the thing, what other countries are doing,
right.
What other countries are doing is they're sending their criminals to the southern border of the US and they're getting in there. And
that's
why
not
don't
what
we do
no
that?
European countries do.
I don't think,
no European
it may be happening
countries do.
elsewhere, I don't know. Final quick thought, Christopher, if I can. Lloyd makes the point that actually there are some crimes where prison is not really the answer, and that actually community service, humiliation in your local community, that's a good idea, isn't it?
Well, making folk work in public to help out and tidy up their communities and paint out the graffiti, etc., etc. That is, unfortunately, it's almost as expensive as prison. And the problem is the country is bust. And so what's now got to happen is that, first of all, there's got to be a debate of the sort we're having now about who should go to prison. If I pray silently in such a way that I'm not disturbing anyone anywhere near a baby butchering clinic, then
we're not having any more of that.
But if, on the other hand, I go and cause violence, or I do drug offences, or I do firearms offences, those are the people you've got to lock up.
We want them in prison.
Because the primary purpose of prison is to protect the public from the danger.
There's an element of punishment. Right, I'm drawing stumps. It's close of play on that particular debate. In a moment, we'll discuss another debate. Yes, it was Trump v. Harris last night, and I think the consensus is that Harris did rather better than many people thought she could.
Evening, time for your weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty cold out there this evening. Temperatures are going to fall further through the night. Yes, there will be a touch of frost, particularly in parts of the north in the countryside, thanks to the winds coming around this area of low pressure all the way down from the Arctic, hence why we do have the chill at the moment. There's a fair few showers still around this evening, but for many they'll tend to fade. We'll keep some going in northern Scotland, a few for the north of Northern Ireland, northern parts of Wales, northwest England, but elsewhere many areas dry and clear, and the wind's easing a touch overnight, which is why those temperatures will tumble down to 4 or 5 degrees in towns and cities, but rural spots, particularly in the northern half of the UK, likely to be close to or a little bit below freezing to start Thursday. So yes, a chill in the air tomorrow morning, and there will still be showers in the air as well coming in across northern Scotland. Still a fairly brisk wind, but not as lively, not as gusty as the winds have been through the day today. Those breezes will bring a few showers across the northern parts of Northern Ireland, plenty packing in across Wales, although the south coast probably dry, and a good part of England having a dry, fine and sunny start to Thursday, albeit with that chill in the air. Now, as we go through the day, we'll see the clouds bubbling up a little bit, but I don't think we'll see as many showers as we've seen through the course of today. It's still plenty for Wales and a few more coming into southwest England and across northern Scotland, but much of southern Scotland dry, and large parts of eastern England and the Midlands also staying dry and dodging the showers with some sunny spells. But despite a bit of sunshine, temperatures on the chilly side. Similar values to today, but at least the winds tomorrow will be a little lighter. Lighter still on Friday, and even again likely to see more of a frost on Friday morning. Much of the country, though, will be dry and fine on Friday. We will see rain coming into the northwest. The wind's picking up here as well. That's a sign of a change. Things turning wetter across the north into the weekend, staying dry in the south and slowly warming up.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, if you were up at 2 o'clock this morning, you would have watched perhaps the debate between Harris and Trump. If you weren't, here's a little snapshot for you.
I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain. His former chief of staff, a four-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy.
Well, there's some of the highlights, and, you know, it doesn't matter what Trump does, he always grabs the headlines. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. I promise you, as with everything else he says, it will prove to be true, I have no doubt. And in fact, when he was president, he actually signed an order to make it illegal in America to eat dogs or cats. But that's by the by. But I think, and I'm joined by Pablo Ohana, election campaign strategist and advisor to Harris, I think a lot of people thought that being off script, Harris would fall flat on her face. That didn't happen, did it?
No, it certainly did not. It was an extraordinary performance. She commanded the debate from the second she walked onto stage. And she didn't just win the debate, she finished his campaign. It was an absolutely resounding defeat. It was the best debate performance I've seen, his worst, her best. Frankly, I think it's over for him. I was on his channel 2 days ago and I said she would eviscerate him. And boy, did she. She was prepared. She was disciplined, clear, coherent. She debated as a prosecutor. It's not surprising, you know, contrasting her vision to take America forwards, turning the page on his division. It was an absolute masterclass in death by 1,000 paper cuts from Kamala Harris.
What surprised me was Trump's best line was, you're saying all these things, but you've been there for 3.5 years, and he delivered that at the end of the debate and not at the beginning. That really surprised me.
Yeah, it surprised me too, actually. And I thought, as a strategist, I thought that's your best line of attack. And it came way too late. Too many people would have switched off by that point. But in general, you know, he was hunched over, he was looking down, he couldn't face Kamala. You know, he was asked about immigration and he talked about crowd sizes, and then he went to World War III and then back to crowd sizes and cats and dogs. It was chaotic and it was all over the place.
Well, that's what Donald Trump is. Pablo, thank you for joining us. Now, a very strong pro-Harris view. They're not surprisingly. Thank you for joining us this evening on the channel. Christopher, I don't think it was an overwhelming win for Harris. I think it's more of a score draw, because I think on some of the big policy issues, Trump is still ahead. But
well, on the economy and inflation, He scored several blows, and there's no way that Harris is going to find that easy to deal with because, as he eventually said, she is the incumbent. What the heck's been going on?
Yeah.
And, Biden did start the campaign by lying about the rate of inflation at the end of the Trump era, and they seem to lie with great facility now on both sides.
Politics does a bit of that. If I may, quick thought, Lloyd, on last night.
I think it was also about expectations. The expectations for Kamala was not that high, actually. And the expectations for Trump, to some extent, even though he's not the incumbent, he is the incumbent in TV debates. Because he's done quite a few of them now, and this was her first rolling out. And he underperformed clearly, and she overperformed, performed well. If they do another debate, that will be a real teller. But if they leave it like this, I think she will have the spring in her step.
I think that's probably true. Because she did, as you say, she overperformed against expectations. Now, a couple of quick thoughts. What the Farage? The European Union, founded on the free movement of goods and services and people. And suddenly the Germans are saying, oh, no, we're having none of that. We couldn't give a damn what the ECHR court in Strasbourg says. We're bringing back full border controls. Is this the beginning? I mean, we had Brexit. Is this the beginning of the fraying of the European project as we've known it for nearly 70 years?
Yes, because free movement is essential to the project. The whole idea is we are all citizens of a single dictatorship and we should all love the dictators. In practice, the moment you have to impose border controls, this has a huge advantage for us because the reason why there are so many people arriving at Calais and coming across is they're not stopped at any of the internal EU borders.
Within Schengen.
Increasing numbers of countries are now thinking of working on these lines. Sweden even is thinking of doing this.
So, Lloyd, you're a great Europhile. This is a big blow to the project.
Well, it was never free movement of people, it was free movement of workers. But
that's become workers and their dependents.
Yes, which turned into that. But I actually think that it is returning to what Britain really's view of the EU was. We never got rid of our border controls, and the idea that you now have technology that can process people quite quickly means that you could have borders that people don't really recognise very much, particularly if you are not travelling by car and road so much, but particularly when you're travelling by aeroplane and train. And I think that it's probably over-egged that this is the end of the European Union. Germany will find a technical solution.
I'm not saying it's the end, but I'm saying it is a very major blow to what everybody in Brussels and Strasbourg...
The great thing about the European Union is that they always manage to work out a fix and a fudge.
For now. Now, quick thought on this. In Australia, the Australian Prime Minister is proposing a ban, and by the way, Australia loves to ban everything, but they're proposing a ban on social media for under 16s. And this phone, this is a Barbie phone, it's not mine, I can assure you. But this phone is selling like hotcakes in Britain because, do you know what? It's a phone. You make phone calls, you send messages, it doesn't have access to social media. And a lot of British parents are finding that quite attractive. I'm going to get a very quick thought from my panel. Is it possible to ban social media for under 16s, and is it desirable?
I don't think it's desirable, and I don't think it's possible to have outright bans for under 16s. But what I think you can do is limit it. The way... I think the idea that a young person can only access social media when they go on the home computer with mum or dad looking over their shoulder, because what we want to do is train young people up on how to use social media. So the danger is if you ban it completely, then suddenly when they turn 16, 18, then they are in a lake of sharks. What you need is step-by-step introduction, just like you do with lots of other things in life.
And we want kids out playing football and having fun, don't we, rather than being on their phones on social media?
I'm with the teens on this one. If they want social media, they should have it. And why? Free speech again. And the parents' job is to make sure that they're taught how to use it responsibly and what not to do with it. And I know several parents who have this problem now. Their solution is not, no, you can't have your phone. It is, please don't visit Pornhub and things like that. Please just be sensible. So I think we mustn't try to do as the communists used to do and put the state in the place of the parents. Parents have a responsibility to bring up their children properly. And if they bring up their children properly, why shouldn't they have social media at any age that their parents think it's OK?
I have to say, folks, I just do not think it's possible to ban social media for under 16s. But I understand what the Aussie PM Albanese is saying, that there's nothing worse, is there, than seeing kids 11, 12 just obsessed with their phones and not out having fun and doing what they should be doing. If only all parents were as good and as dedicated as Christopher thinks they should be, and they're not. In a moment, are we going to back British farming? Are we putting enough money in? And does it make sense for huge 5 square mile solar farms to be built on the verges of Lincolnshire?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
More than half of people aged 50 and over feel happier from having a friendship, and 46% feel a sense of belonging too. Tomorrow is the start of Friendship Month. The Oddfellows, a non-profit friendly society that provides older adults with opportunities to create new friendships, is now inviting more people this September to join their local groups and expand their friendship circles through giving a taster activity at local community centres. We're joined now by Jane Nelson, who's the CEO of Oddfellows. Good morning, Jane. Thanks for joining us. As someone in my mid-30s, I've even noticed as well that my own friendship group has diminished over the years as kind of, you know, people get married and have kids and they kind of drift apart and don't make time for each other.
How important is it to have friends separate to your family? What benefit does that bring you?
As you do get older, you do lose friends for a variety of reasons. Either you lose touch or they have an illness or they pass away as you get older. The stats show that people love spending time with their friends. It always takes somebody, doesn't it? Somebody's got to make that first step to send a text to say, do you fancy meeting up for coffee, or do you fancy going to the pub, or whatever the arrangement's going to be. But sometimes somebody always has to be make that first step and text or phone. And I think the other key thing is it usually tends to be the same person, but that doesn't matter as long as that connectivity is made, because that's what you need. You need the connectivity. If you think about when we were children, we'd go around the playground and say, will you be my friend? Well, we don't tend to do that as we get older. But be brave, look on Oddfellows website, see all the amazing events we've got on, go to see what's going on in your area, oddfellows.co.uk, or you can telephone 0800 028 1810, and our team will be more than happy to point them in the right direction of their local events, and there's so much going on, 300 going on.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Brexit Britain has not talked enough about farming and the direction we want it to take. After all, for nearly half a century, it was Brussels that really decided how agriculture was to be managed. Well, it did come up today in the House of Commons. Here's what was said.
Today is Back British Farming Day. Can he therefore confirm, whether he will be adopting the NFU's recent proposal to enshrine a national food security target in law?
Prime Minister.
Well, food security is really important. I'm glad he's raised that. We have talked to the NFU about this, and rural issues are really important, and that's what we fought the election on, why we've got a lot of rural constituencies sitting behind me now. We'll continue to talk to the NFU. We do take food security very, very seriously.
Now, food security, let's not con ourselves, because in 2 world wars, German submarines very nearly, in fact, in 1917, very nearly beat us. So we've never actually been, in modern times, fully self-sufficient. But this is about priorities. And I mentioned earlier on, before the break, the Cotton solar farm, 5 square miles of what would be really quite good agricultural land. Lloyd, farming's ours. We're in control of it. There are always rows about budgets, and the NFU are asking for a massive uplift in what government spends in agricultural. Well, we don't call it subsidy. We call it sort of environmental targets. Are we right? Is Ed Miliband right to build all these huge solar farms?
Well, farmers and land have always been a trade-off between different uses of it. Whether you're going to mine something in that piece of land, whether you're going to farm that piece of land.
That's a fair point.
The problem is that we don't have a national land strategy about where we want different bits of land to. There are some solar farms that you can build and still farm a certain percentage underneath them with animals. There are other areas where it's completely impossible to do a mixed kind of environment. There needs to be a proper strategy to say what level of food production do we want in this country. Let's then provide the subsidies to do that. The subsidies that the last government brought in focused far too much on getting farmers to do things, kind of hedgerows, etc., and not really enough on producing the amounts of food that we wanted.
Well, I mean, Boris Johnson, of course, Christopher, famously at the conference, build back beaver. We're going to rewild 30% of British farmland. We've really, since Brexit, not quite known what to do with farming, have we?
No, that's because we've got used to it not being a free market. And here with Lloyd, we have, let's have the socialist solution, let's have a central national plan. Flanders and Swan would have great fun with that.
No, without a national plan, you get solar farms.
No, you don't. What you do is, I was talking to the charming local farmer just down the road from us, who's just sold up to an even bigger local farmer, and he's retired.
Funny that.
But you can put a row of solar panels along the northern margin of each field, along the hedge. It doesn't take any ground from the field. And if you do that on every field that you want to have it on, you can get far more solar power out of the farmland than ever you could by having these huge acreages, where it only takes, as we've seen in Texas recently, one tornado comes through, and we do get those in Britain, one heavy storm, and the whole lot gets smashed. You have them along the northern field margins, then that's not wasting the land. You can get lots of electricity, and they're very easy to maintain if they're on a continuous line.
We all agree with that. But the question is,
except
why
that nobody suggested it until now.
No, well,
enjoy it.
No, why are farmers choosing at the moment to abandon some bits of land and convert them to solar farms?
Because of the socialist subsidies.
No, because they get more money. Well, they have subsidies for agriculture, and
the socialist subsidies for solar farms in Britain, of all things. I mean, it's a standing joke among international comedians.
Hang on a second, Christopher.
Britain has a newspaper
and
called
they're all manufactured in blooming China.
But there does need to be a framework in which people operate, and at the moment there is no framework.
You don't have to. If you want to put a row of solar panels along your northern field margin, you can do it. Now, farmers out there, you'll make lots of money and you won't lose any farmland.
I'm going to come back to the politics of this, because one thing Starmer said that was true was that the Labour Party are now representing more rural areas than they've ever done in the history of the Labour Party. Let's go to Neil Parish, former Conservative Member of Parliament. Neil, what on earth? Good evening. What on earth should our policy on farming be? No one seems to know.
Well, let them produce food, Nigel. That's always been my motto. And the trouble is, what you're doing with these solar farms, you're taking out very good land. If it's marginal land, not going to be able to produce too much food, well, then it's probably not the end of the world if you put solar panels on it. But when you've got sort of grade 1 and 2 land that's being used for it, where you can grow good vegetables, good cereals, all of these things, it's essential we grow in this country because we're a temperate climate and we need to grow food. So, I mean, I think in the end, the government's got to come down and decide, do you want energy, do you want food, you want a mixture, but we need to be able to keep the land that's good for production and then have... The only trouble with the idea of putting solar panels all around the edges of field, it's quite a good idea. The trouble is it's all the cabling and everything else. You see, they much rather have a huge solar farm, put all the infrastructure in, and it becomes like an industrial site, and that's the problem with it all. And I'm really keen to see good food produced in this country. And I noticed today that Keir Starmer sort of really evaded the question, did he not, on was he going to have a plan for food security? Because, yes, we're not going to grow bananas and pineapples, but we can grow plenty of wheat, plenty of vegetables, plenty of potatoes, all these things. We should not be importing food that others perhaps across the world could do with better than we do, because, you know, there's still people hungry in the world. And all the time, you see, we're taking land out of production. Even the environmental policies, some of them are fine, but some of them are just reducing production. And I've been all about this all the time I was in Parliament. I'm doing a podcast now. We can do both, that is produce food and environment. So I have kept to exactly the same tune, Nigel.
Neil, you got the ad in, articulate as ever. Thank you. I'm going to say thank you to my panel. We're over for the evening. And Neil Parish, the most famous farmer in the country, I suppose, for many reasons. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me. What are you discussing this evening?
I'm going to be talking about Tata Steel and this bailout, which all comes about because we've got mad green policies. And thousands of people are going to lose their jobs. We're not going to make proper steel, and we're going to import it from other countries, and then we're going to be protectionist. It's all bonkers, and John Redwood's joining me.
Oh, well, I'm sure he'll be very strong on that particular point. What a shame Lloyd's not staying on. Well, that's it. We're done. We're done for the evening. I'm back with you tomorrow. First, though, let's get the all-important weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, time for your weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Pretty cold out there this evening. Temperatures are going to fall further through the night. Yes, there will be a touch of frost, particularly in